بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه والتابعين. لقد نوينا تعلم وتعليم وتذكر وتذكير ونفع وانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة حتى على تمسك بكتاب الله وسنة نبيه وإدعاء الله ودلالة الخير وصلة الحمد كل ما نواه مشايخنا وابتغاء وجه الله وثوابه وقربه. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما نافعا يا كريم. Bismillah. Alhamdulillah, we finished last week talking about certain words and how they appear when they are in the state of jazm. And then we talked about how certain words are mu'rab, meaning that they accept the change of i'rab on the end of its word, either by means of changing of the vowel or by means of changing of the letter. Right, so I can say ja'a zaydun, or I can say ra'aytu zaydan or marartu bi zaydin. So the last letter changes according to its state. But if it's a certain types of words we talked about, like if it's dual or if it's jama' mudhakkar salam, then it'll change whether it's marfu', mansub, or makhfud or majrur. Then it'll change by a letter, not by a haraka. So al-muslim, ja'a al-muslimun, or ra'aytu al-muslimin, or ra'aytu al-muslimin. So we talked about that last time, and then the specific details of all the different types of words and how they would show up when they are in a different state, if they're in marfu', if they're mansub, or if they're majrur. So now the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, is bringing us to a discussion of verbs. And he brings certain things that he mentioned earlier in the book, just as a recap, where he says, قال باب الأفعال الأفعال ثلاثة ماض ومضارع وأمر نحو ضرب ويضرب وإضرب. He says that in the chapter of verbs, of af'al, the plural of fi'al, that verbs are three types: past tense, then mudari'. Mudari' includes present and future tense, and then command. Right. So under the umbrella of command, you'll have a negative command as well. So that would include both. So some books you might see that verbs are of four types. So it's not a contradiction. They just considered that a negative command is also a command. Might as well just say that's one that has two types. Right. So he gives three examples. Daraba. Daraba is past tense. Yadribu is mudari'. It can be translated as he is hitting or he will hit. Right, so it can be either present or future tense. And idrib, which is a command, hit. So he says, the Sharh, rahmahullah ta'ala, he says, وَأَقُولُ يَنْقَسِمُ الْفِعْلُ إِلَى ثَلَاثَةِ أَقْسَامٍ. That the verb divides into three types. الْقِسْمُ الْأَوَّلُ, the first type, al-madi, which is the past tense. وهو ما يدل على حصول شيء قبل زمن المتكلم. قبل زمن التكلم. قبل زمن التكلم. That the first type is the past tense, and it is that which is indicative of attaining something prior to the time period of the speech, to the time period that the speech happened. So when he said Zayd slept, right? So that was an action that was established prior to me saying that statement. So it was past tense. It's another way of describing past tense. And he gives examples: daraba, nasara, fataha, alima, hasiba, and karuma. Right? So even past tense has different. So some words, daraba, nasara, fataha, all fatha. Some alima, sami'a, right? Jazi'a. There's a lot of words. Hasiba, and then karuma, faquha, ba'uda. There's a lot of different words. So daraba, he hit. Nasra, he helped. Fataha, he opened. Alima, he knew. Hasiba, he reckoned. And Karama, he became noble. He was noble. والقسم الثاني المضارع وهو ما يدل على حصول شيء في زمن التكلم أو بعده. And the second type is the mudari', and it is that which indicates to the obtaining of something in the time period of the speech or after that, or after the speech. So which is either present or future. Example, يضرب, he is or he will hit. ينصر, he is helping or he will help. يفتح, he is opening or he will open. يعلم, he does know or he will know. يحسب, he reckons or he will reckon. And يكرم, he is noble or he will be noble. So and then the context of the sentence will tell you which of the two is more applicable, whether it's present tense or future tense. القسم الثالث, the third type, and this is all things that he mentioned in the first few chapters when he divided speech into either verbs, nouns, or harf, or huruf, particles. So he gave these definitions before. So he says, القسم الثالث, the third type is al-amru, a command. وهو ما يطلب به حصول شيء, it is that by means of which the obtaining of something is requested after بعد زمن التكلم, after the time of the speech occurring. So if I say sit down, then I am seeking that sitting is established after the words come out of my mouth, then the sitting happens, right? It can't happen before I made the command because that would not be possible. نحو اضرب, hit. وانصر, help. وافتح, open. واعلم, know. واحسب, reckon. And wakrum, be noble. And so it's a command. And then he mentions here, وَقَدْ ذَكَرْنَا لَكَ فِي أَوَّلِ الْكِتَابِ هَذَا التَّقْسِيمِ. And we have already mentioned to you before in the beginning of the book these types. وَذَكَرْنَا لَكَ مَعَهُ عَلَامَاتٍ, and we mentioned with it certain signs. عَلَامَاتِ كُلِّ قِسْمٍ مِنْ هَذِهِ الْأَقْسَامِ الثَّلَاثَةِ. We mentioned to you with it signs for each of these types. So there are signs that tell whether a word is past tense. There are signs that tell whether a word is present tense or future tense. And there's a sign to tell whether a word is a command. So that's just an overview before he goes into the actual subject. Any questions on that before we go? Okay, tamam. Follow.
Sometimes the madi is used for something in the present tense with like so how can we differentiate between the sense?
That's a good question. So the question was that sometimes past tense is used with a meaning of present tense, right? For emphasis or for other reasons. That is true. That is definitely true. Allah speaks about the Day of Judgment many times in the past tense. Right? إِذَا وَقَعَتِ الْوَاقِعَةِ. وَقَعَتْ is past tense. When the calamity occurs. Right? هَلْ أَتَاكَ حَدِيثُ الْغَاشِيَةِ. Did the news of al-Ghashiyah come to you? So it can be used like that, but somebody could say that for Allah, all past, present, future, all of it's the same. He's not constricted by time. But there is another way the Arabs used to use past tense is for dua. Right? So when you make dua, like for instance, when we hear the name of a Sahaba, radiyallahu anhum, we say radiyallahu anhum. Radiya is past tense. Right? That Allah was pleased with them. Right? So there's a kind of an expectation that the dua would have is established, right, by making it past tense. So yes, that's true, but that would go more into usage and eloquence and other subjects like balagha and how they would use things for other meanings and very subtle meanings. But the rules of a past tense word would still apply to it, right? So it will still be maftuh akhir, right? All the rules that you're going to start to do now would apply to it. Any other question? تمام. So he says أحكام الفعل, the rules of the verb. قال فالماضي مفتوح الآخر أبدا. He said that the past tense word, it always ends in a fatha. Right? Sorry. Yeah. والأمر مجزوم أبدا. And the command will always be in a state of jazm at all times. والمضارع, as far as the second type, so we did past tense and we did command, that's the first and the third. As far as the second type, المضارع ما كان في أوله إحدى الزوائد الأربع التي يجمعها قولك أنيت. It is that which in its beginning is one of the four extra letters which can be combined in saying the statement أنيت. أنيت, alif, noon, ya, and ta. So they just combine them together. And so that's easier to memorize, right? So, but in general, it's alif, noon, ya, and ta. They are one of those four will be added to the beginning of a mudari' to indicate toward the pronoun that is in there. So if I say af'alu, I am doing, right? That hamza is an indication of who the doer is. If I said naf'alu, we are doing, or yaf'alu, he is doing, or taf'alu, she is doing, or you are doing. So those are the four types of letters that are added to the beginning. So he says, وَهُوَ مَرْفُوعٌ أَبَدًا. It is always marfu'. Right? حَتَّى يَدْخُلَ عَلَيْهِ نَاصِبٌ أَوْ جَازِمٌ. Until a word that makes it mansub or a word that makes it majzoom enters upon it. So you can say that the mudari' is marfu' until proven otherwise. The default of a mudari' is marfu'. So that is the matan. The Sharh rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, وَأَقُولُ بَعْدَ أَنْ بَيَّنَ الْمُصَنِّفُ أَنْوَاعَ الْأَفْعَالِ. And I say, after the author has clarified the types of verbs, شَرَعَ فِي بَيَانِ أَحْكَامِ كُلِّ نَوْعٍ مِنْهَا. That he is now commenced into explaining the rulings of each and every individual type. So he said that there's three types. Now he's going into the rulings of each specific type. So number one, فَحُكْمُ الْفِعْلِ الْمَاضِي, the ruling of the past tense verb is الْبِنَاءُ عَلَى الْفَتْحِ, is that it's mabni. Mabni is the opposite of mu'rab. So mu'rab is that which can accept different vowels on the end of the word. You can also accept tanween, right? There's a lot of rulings that apply to that. But the opposite is mabni. Mabni, whatever it ends with, it'll never change, no matter what state it's in. So al-bina'u al-fathi. So the ruling of the past tense verb is that it's stuck, al-bina, on a fatha. وهذا الفتح إما ظاهر وإما مقدر. And that fatha on the end is either going to be very obvious and you can see it, like what we just mentioned just now, a few examples. ضرب, نصر, رضي, رضي الله عنهم, right? رضي, there's a fatha. Now fatha is visible, so it's zahir. So either the fatha is going to be zahir, visible, or muqaddar, or assumed. So أما الفتح الظاهر, as for the visible fatha, ففي الصحيح الآخر الذي لم يتصل به واو جماعة ولا ضمير رفع متحرك. So which type of word would you see the visible fatha on the end of a maldi verb, a past tense verb, is that word whose last letter is sahih. And we talked about last week that a letter that's sahih is any of the letters that are not alif, waw, or ya. So alif, waw, or ya are the sick letters, you can say. Right? The huruf al-illa. Illa is another way to say sickness. Right? So the words that are, all the other letters besides alif, waw, and ya are called sahih letters. Literally healthy letters. So the visible fatha on the end of a past tense verb will be in those words whose last letter is sahih. Right? Any letter besides alif, waw, or ya. الذي لم يتصل به واو جماعة. So that's the first condition, that the last letter is sahih. and that the end of the word is not connected with a waw that indicates toward plural. Right, so we know when we do the verbs, the scale of the verbs, that daraba, he hits. Daraba, those two men hits. Darabu, those three or more men hits. So that waw that's on the end, you can't see the fatha because of it. Darabu. Right, so that waw is called waw jama'ah, the waw of the plural. So the ones that don't have that waw on the end, right? ولا ضمير رفع متحرك, nor is there any pronoun on the end, nor is there any pronoun that has a haraka on it. If that's attached to the end, then you won't see the fatha. وكذلك في كل ما كان آخره واوا أو ياء, as well as anything whose last letter is a waw or a ya. So then he gives examples to clarify that. أكرم وقدم وسافر. أكرم, he ennobled somebody else. وقدم, he arrived. وسافر, he traveled. ونحو سافرت زينب, Zainab traveled. وحضرت سعاد, Sa'ad came back, arrived, you can say. So these letters, you can see the fatha on the last letter. Safarat, rat, hadarat. Even there's a ta there, but it's not mutaharrik. Right? That last letter is there, but it doesn't have a fatha, dhamma, or kasra. It has a sakin. So you can still see the fatha before it, on the last letter of the verb. So safarat, the last letter of the verb is what? Anybody? The last letter? Which is the last letter? Yeah, so the ta is the pronoun, right? So, which is attached to the verb, right? So the last letter of the verb is the ra. So you can still see the fatha. So these are all examples of the fatha being visible. All right, so just because the ta attached to it doesn't take the fatha away from the ra, right? Because the ta doesn't have a fatha or a dhamma or a kasra, because it has a sakin. But if I changed it to, for instance, instead of rat, I put tu, which means I, right? Safar tu. Now that the fatha on the ra is gone. Right, so that would be what he mentions here, that nothing is connected to the end of the word, like a waw jama'ah, a plural waw. Safaru, the fatha falls off the ra. There's no fatha on the ra. I can't see the fatha anymore. ولا ضمير رفع متحرك, a pronoun which is marfu', meaning indicates to the fa'il, and it's mutaharrik. So safarat, the pronoun is there, it's marfu', but it's not mutaharrik. So you can still see the fatha on the ra. But if I say safartu or safarta or safarti, right, then that pronoun is there, it's marfu', but since it's mutaharrik, I can't see the fatha on the ra. So the fatha is no longer zahir. It's not visible. Okay, so the examples that are where it is visible: akrama, fatha, wa qadima, fatha, safara, there's a fatha on the end, as well as safarat. So the fatha is still there on the ra. It's visible. Safarat Zainabu, wa hadarat Sa'adu, wa nahwa radiya, wa shaqiya, wa sarwa, wa badwa. Right, so these letters, the last letter is mutaharrik, that you can still see the fatha on the last letter. So, any questions with that before we go to the second type? So the second type is an assumed fatha. It's not visible, but it's assumed to be there. Okay. So, وَأَمَّا الْفَتْحُ الْمُقَدَّرُ, as far as the fatha, which is assumed, it's not visible, you can't actually point to it and see it, but it's assumed. فَهُوَ عَلَى ثَلَاثَةِ أَنْوَاءٍ, that it is three types. There's three types. Going back to the reason why it's not shown. Right? لِأَنَّهُ إِمَّا أَن يَكُونَ, because it is going to be مُقَدَّرًا لِلتَّعَذُّرِ. It's going to be assumed Why? Because it's not possible for that fatha to stay there, to be there. وهذا في كل ما كان آخره ألفا. So this one applies to every past tense verb whose last letter is an alif. Because when you have an alif does not accept the fatha. Alif technically is not a letter in and of itself. It's a stretching letter, right? If I say that's not an alif, that's a hamza, right? So because a hamza can accept the fatha, right? I can say qara'a, right? But he's talking about an alif, right? Just when I say ba, ta, the alif doesn't have any fatha or kasra or dhamma on it. It's just a stretching letter. So any word whose last letter is is an alif, like da'a. Da'a means to make du'a or to make da'wah. Da'a yad'u da'watan or du'a'an. Wasa'a. So it's alif maksura, also counted as an alif. Da'a wasa'a. فكل منهما فعل ماض. So both of them, da'a and sa'a, are past tense verbs. مبني على فتح مقدر على الألف, that are mabani with a fatha, which is assumed because of the alif being there. منع من ظهوره تعذره, and it's not able to be seen because there's nowhere for it to be. It's not possible for it to show up on the alif. That fatha is not possible to be on top of an alif. So you can't say sa'a, sa'a, because then that would be a hamza, right? Or da'a. You can't say that because fatha does not go on top of an alif. But it's still considered to be there because the original was da'awa, sa'aya. But the Arabs didn't speak like that. They said, instead of saying da'awa, which is quite difficult, they would say da'a, much smoother, right? Instead of saying sa'aya, sa'ayu, they would say sa'a, sa'aya, sa'aw. So there's certain changes that happen because of the way the Arabs spoke. So that's the first type. The first type is not possible that the fatha could be visible on that spot. So it's considered assumed due to its inability to be there. The second, وَإِمَّا أَن يَكُونَ الْفَتْحُ مُقَدَّرًا لِلْمُنَاسَبَةِ. Then either the fatha is considered assumed due to its relation. وَذَلِكَ فِي كُلِّ فِعْلٍ مَاضٍ اتصل بِهِ وَاوُ جَمَاعَةٍ. And that applies to every past tense verb that on the end of it is the waw of plural. The waw of plural is on the end of it. So if I say كَتَبَ, the fatha is there and it's present, right? It's visible. If I say كَتَبُوا, and this goes back to what we mentioned before, that the waw on the end that's attached is for plural. Because of that, the fatha cannot be there. So he says, example, كتبوا وسعدوا فكل منهما فعل ماض. So each of them are past tense verbs. مبني على فتح, which are mabani with a fatha, but that fatha is not visible. It's مقدر, which is assumed على آخره, to be on its end. منع من ظهوره اشتغال المحل بحركة المناسبة. And the reason why it's not visible is because that place is already taken up by another vowel which is attached to it, which is the waw of plural. Right? So because the waw is attached, the fatha is no longer allowed to be there because that place is already taken up. So you can't say kataba'u, right? It just becomes katabu. وواو الجماعة مع كل منهما فاعل مبني على السكون في محل رفع. So in each of these situations, when you say كتبوا وسعدوا, that waw of plural in both of those situations is considered the fa'il. Right? So that waw indicates to the masculine plural, right? Whom, they. So when you see كتبوا or سعدوا, they wrote, they were successful. But it's mabani with a sukun, so katabu has a sukun on it, fi mahalli rafa, and it's in the place of rafa. It's considered marfu'. So the first one is not able to be there. Second, the place is already taken up by the waw jama'ah. And the third, وَإِمَّا أَن يَكُونَ الْفَتْحُ مُقَدَّرًا لِدَفْعِ كَرَاهَةِ تَوَالِي أَرْبَعَةِ مُتَحَرِّكَاتٍ. And the last reason is that the fatha is muqaddar, it's assumed. Why? In order to prevent that which is disliked of four continuous words that have vowels on them. Four continuous vowel words. So if I say, so he says, and he's going to give example. He says, وَذَلِكَ فِي كُلِّ فِعْلٍ مَاضٍ اتصل به ضمير رفع متحرك. And that occurs in every past tense verb, at the end of which a pronoun which is marfu and mutaharrik attaches to it. كتاء الفاعل, like the ta'a of the fa'il, mean katabta or katabti, right? Katabtu. So that ta is the fa'il of the verb. Katabtu, I. Katabta, you, one male. Katabti, you, one female. So that's the ta, which indicates to a fa'il. Wa nun niswa. Nun niswa is for feminine plural. Katabna, which means those three or more women wrote. So because of those attaching to the end of the word, then the last letter of the actual verb, which would be the ba in this situation, does not have a fatha on it. Right? It could have had a fatha, so it's not like the second type where it was already taken up. Because we can say katabana, katabata, katabati, katabatu, right? But that continuous four fathas in a row is very disliked in Arabic. Right? It's not smooth. It's not how the Arabs spoke. So they put a sakin on the last letter of the verb. Katabna, katabta, katabtu. Right? Thus, the fatha on the end becomes assumed and it's not visible. So he says, example, katabtu, wa katabta, wa katabti, wa katabna. So the first three were with the ta, and the second two, katabna was for the plural, and katabna is for the feminine plural. فكل واحد من هذه الأفعال, so each one of these verbs, فعل ماض is a past tense verb, مبني على فتح, its end is مبني with a fatha, مقدر, which is assumed, it's not visible, it's assumed, على آخره, to be on its end. منع من ظهوره اشتغال المحل بالسكون العارض. The reason why it's not visible is because in place of it they put a sukun due to the circumstance. A circumstantial sukun, you can say. But in that circumstance is so that we can remove the possibility of four fathas in a row. Right? Katabana, katabata, katabatu, katabati, katabana, right? All of that. In order to do that, that was the circumstance in which we said no. The sukun is better. It sounds and it's closer. It's what how the Arabs spoke. So he says, لِدَفْعِ كَرَاهَةِ تَوَالِي أَرْبَعِ مُتَحَرَّكَاتٍ, right? To remove the reprehensibility of continual four voweled words, four voweled letters in a row. To remove that, they put a sakin on the last letter of the verb. فِيمَا هُوَ كَالْكَلِمَةِ الْوَاحِدَةِ, in one word. وَالتَّاء أو na أو النون فاعل. So in all those situations, the ta, katabta, katabti, katabtu. So that would apply to all four of those. Or the na, which is katabna, nahnu. Or the other noon, katabna, which is noon and niswa. The noon for the feminine plural. All of those are considered the fa'il of that word. مبني على الضم أو الفتح أو الكسر, which is mabni with a dhamma if it's katabtu, right? Or a fatha if it's katabta, or a kasra if it's katabti, or a sukun if it's katabna. في محل رفع, and they'll all be in the place of marfu. So,
and why do we read katabata in the third person feminine dual?
Katabata in the third person feminine dual. Right. So the alif is the one that's indicating to the dual. Actually, it's going to come very soon, inshallah. Remind me when we get there. Should talk about that. So that was past tense verbs. Now he goes into command. Any question before we go to the next one? So, وحكم فعل الأمر البناء على ما يجزم به مضارعه. And the ruling of a commanding verb is that it's mabani, meaning it's not mu'rab. It's mabani upon that vowel which its equivalent mudari' would become majzoom with. So for instance, yadribu is the verb of example, right? Yadribu. If I made yadribu majzoom, lam yadrib. Lam yadrib. Right? So this verb became majzoom with a sukun. Right? So same way, the corresponding command verb would be majzoom with a sukun. Why? Because the amr, the command word, is made from the mudari'. So I have, for instance, tadribu, you are hitting, or you will hit. In order to make it a command, I would take off the ta, and then I will make the last letter majzoom, and then I would add a hamza if necessary. So tadribu becomes idrib. Tadribu becomes idrib. So since it's made from the mudari', then it takes the rulings that apply to the mudari'. However, the mudari' becomes majzoom, same way the amr becomes majzoom. Another example, tadribani. You two men are hitting or will hit. So I want to change that to you two men hit as a command. Right? So when I make tadribani majzoom, what happens to it? If I say lam tadrib, what happens? How does it become majzoom? Hadf nun, the nun falls off. So lam tadriba, right? So the same thing would apply to the amr. If I say you two men hit, it'll be idriba, right? So the nun will fall off. So he's mentioning here that the ruling of the fi'l al-amr, of the commanding verb, al-bina'u, that it's mabni, ala ma yujzamu bihi mudari'uhu. With that ending, or that vowel, by means of which the mudari' becomes majzoom. That which makes its mudari' majzoom is what you're going to use to make that this amr will be mabni on that same thing. So if the mudari' becomes majzoom with a sukun, the amr will be mabni ala sukun. If the mudari' becomes mabni by removing the nun, then the amr will also be mabni, and the nun will be removed. That will come again and be explained in the examples. So he says, فَإِنْ كَانَ مُضَارِعُهُ صَحِيحَ الْآخِرِ. If its mudari' has a sahih letter on as its last letter. I mean, it's not a waw, alif, or ya. وَيُجْزَمُ بِالسُّكُونِ, and it becomes majzoom by adding a sukun on the end. Then كَانَ الْأَمْرُ مَبْنِيًّا عَلَى السُّكُونِ. Then the amr will also be mabni ala sukun. وهذا السكون, and this sukun, إما ظاهر, will either be visible, وإما مقدر, or assumed, just like we did in the past tense. فالسكون الظاهر له موضعان. When will there be a sukun that is visible? In two places. مكيف من فضلك. تمام. أحدهما أن يكون صحيح الآخر ولم يتصل به شيء. So one of the two situations where the sukun will be visible is that the last letter is sahih. We mentioned that already. The last letter is sahih. It's not a harf illah. It's not a waw, alif, or ya. And there's nothing attached to it at the end. Right? There's no alif or noon for dual. There's no waw noon for plural. Right? There's no feminine noon niswa. Right? Nothing's attached to the end. Then that situation, you will see the sukun clearly. So for instance, idrib. uktub. Right, so its mudari was tadribu and taktubu. Right, so tadribu, there was nothing after the ba. Whereas if I say tadribani, now there's something after the ba, that would fall in a different place. Right, that would be with removing the noon and not with the sukun. That's zahir. So that's the first place. The last letter is sahih, and there's nothing attached to it at the end. The second, والثاني أن تتصل به نون النسوة. That after the last letter, noon of the feminine plural is attached. نون النسوة. Like اضربنا وأكتبنا مع الإسناد إلى نون النسوة. So here you can still see the sukun ظاهر, visible. أكتبنا. So the ba is the last letter. Right? The ba has a sukun visible on the end, and the noon that was attached to the end did not stop that. It still has the ba. So it was originally uktub. We added the noon, it didn't change the ba. The ba is still a sukun, and then the noon is after it. So those are both the only two situations where you'll see the sukun visible on the end of a mudari verb, right? And the same thing would apply to the command, right? So tadrib will become idrib. Taktubu will become taktub or uktub. Yadribna will become idribna. Yaktubna will become uktubna. So they follow the same rules. And the last letter of the fi'l amr will have a sukun visible. فأما السكون المقدر فله موضع واحد. As far as the sukun which is assumed, is not visible, then it's only one place. وهو أن تتصل به نون التوكيد خفيفة أو ثقيلة. It is when at the end of the verb the noon of emphasis is attached. Either it be khafifa, meaning it just has a sakin on it, or it be thaqila, it has a tashdid as well. Right, so you have, for instance, I can say to Zayd, uktub. Right? I can make it with more emphasis and say uktuban. Right? Uktuban. Or I can say with even more emphasis than that by saying uktubanna. Right? So that the one with just the sakin is the noon of emphasis, khafifa, it's light. With the tashdid on it, uktubanna, right? Then that's the noon of emphasis, which is heavy. Right? And Allah uses that many times in the Quran to show emphasis about what He's speaking about. For instance, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. That verily those who strive regarding us, then we will certainly guide them to many different paths. The only way to translate that would in English, without saying very, 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 or using repetitive emphasizing words, would be to put 3 exclamation points on the end. So, but who would do that? So a lot of these things get lost in translation. So just that one noon adds an extreme emphasis to the sentence. And even before there is another lam. La yahdiyan lanahdiyannahum. So that lam also adds emphasis. Okay, so he says the sukun which is assumed that you won't be able to see visibly is only in one place, is one there's a noon of emphasis, either light emphasis or heavy emphasis attached to the end. So idrib, where you could normally see the sukun, becomes idriban. You won't see the sukun, becomes a fatha. Right? Uktub, where you could see the sukun, becomes uktuban. Or they become idribanna wa uktubanna. Right? So it'll be uktub, uktuba, uktubu would become uktuban, uktubanna, uktubani, uktubunna. So there's extra emphasis and there's some changes that happen to it. So that is if it's the last letter is صحيح. تمام. وإن كان مضارعه معتل الآخر. If the مضارع, the مضارع of which, from which the amr is made, the command is made from the مضارع. So if the مضارع, which the command word, the verb is made, ends in a حرف علة. Right? Before we're talking about ends in a حرف صحيح. Right? Meaning that's not a حرف علة. If it ends in a حرف علة, like a واو or ya or alif, then فهو يجزم بحذف حرف العلة, then it'll become مجزوم by removing that حرف علة. حرف علة will fall off. فالأمر منه يبنى على حذف حرف العلة. So likewise, the amr, the command verb that's made from that مضارع, will also end by removing the حرف علة as well. So example, دعا يدعو. Right? يدعو. So the amr will be made from تدعو. You call. You are calling, or you will call, or you are praying, and you will pray. So the amr is made from that. If I make that مضارع تدعو, right, jazm, then the waw fall. تدعو. Right? So the same thing will apply to the command. Right? So تدعو becomes ud'u. Ud'u with no waw, just the dhamma on the ayn. So the waw fell off. So Allah says, ud'u ila sabili rabbika. Ud'u ila, he saw the Prophet, ud'u ila, what's that? That's plural. Ud'u. There's another one. فادعو إلى ربك. ادعو إلى ربك. إنك على صراط مستقيم. ادعو إلى ربك. So there's just a dhamma on the ayn. There's no waw after it. The waw fell off. So he says نحو ادعو or اقضي or اسعى. اسعى. So is'a was sa'a yas'a. Had an alif maksura on the end. To make it amr, is'a, the alif falls off. Iqdi was qada yaqdi. Right? So taqdi becomes iqdi, the ya falls off at the end. Ud'u had a waw, and the waw fell off. Right? So because that's how it happens in the mudari', also the amr that's made from that mudari' would also, it'll be majzoom by removing the last harf illah, the last letter, which is a harf illah. Any question? Sure.
I was just wondering about the meaning when the author says Najistan, what does it mean Najistan?
By being connected to the nun niswa. By being connected to the nun niswa, then the sukun will still be dhahir, will still be visible. Sorry, I think I skipped that. Thank you. وإن كان مضارعه من الأفعال الخمسة, if the مضارع, which we're going to use to make our amr, is one of the 5 verbs, which is يفعلان, يفعلون, تفعلان, تفعلون, and تفعلين. Correct? If it's one of those 5, then how is our amr going to be? He says, فَيُجْزَمُ بِحَذْفِ النُّونِ. Then it'll become majzoom. That type of mudari' becomes majzoom by removing the noon. So yadribani, if I put lam in front of it, and lam makes the word after it, the verb majzoom. So if I lam yadriba, the noon falls off. Lam yadribu, yadribuna becomes lam yadribu. Tadribina becomes lam tadribi. So all of those, it becomes majzoom by removing the noon. So the same way, فَالْأَمْرُ مِنْهُ يُبْنَى عَلَى حَذْفِ النُّونِ. So the command verb, which is made from that mudari', will also be mabni by removing the noon. So uktuba, right? So it was taktubani. We dropped off the first letter, the harf mudari', the ta. So it became tubani. Then the noon falls off. And one of the reasons why the noon falls off, right, is because, for instance, we have yadribani, right, and we put lam in front of it. Now, once that lam makes the verb majzoom, so if we put a sakin on the noon, right, what happens? We have 2 seconds in a row, right? Yadriban, you can't do that, right? Because those 2 seconds, something's got to fall off. Ijtima'u sakinain is something that is not possible in Nahu. We have to solve it somehow. So the noon falls off. So uktuba, uktubu, and uktubi. So in regards to the second person command, it'll be uktub, which we have, the sukun will be lahir, visible, because there's nothing attached to the ending. Then this dual will be uktuba, which the noon fell off. Uktubu, you 3 men, right? The noon fell off again. Uktubi, you 1 woman, right? Which is made from tadribina, right? So you have the ya, tadribi, idribi, taktubina, uktubi. Then taktuba, uktuba again, and then uktubna, which is also the sukun is lahir. Okay, so the first and the last, the sukun is lahir. Everything in between, the noon fell off. Okay, wal fi'l al-mudari'u. So that was past tense and commands. The command does relate to the mudari'. Why? Because the command word is made from the mudari'. Any question before we go to the mudari'? واضح؟ تفضل.
Is the mudari which has the lam of amr enter upon it considered mudari or?
Yeah. So can you say it louder so they can hear?
If a mudari verb has a lam of amr or a la of nahi enter upon it, is it considered a mudari al-jazm or amr?
As soon as the lam of amr or the lam of nahi enters upon it, it'll automatically become amr or nahi. It's no longer mudari'. So it'll follow the rules. Obviously, it has to do with the mudari', because you say liyaf'al, right? Yaf'al is still there, so it's considered amr ghaib, third person command, but it still has the resemblance of its original mudari' in it. So it'll follow the rules of amr, not the rules of mudari'. Okay, تمام. والفعل المضارع علامته أن يكون في أوله حرف زائد من 4 أحرف يجمعها قولك أنيت، أو قولك نأيت، أو قولك أتينا، أو قولك نأتي. He says فعل مضارع. We mentioned just now that it could be present tense or future tense. That the sign of it, how do we know that this is fi'l mudari' and not something else? Is that its beginning starts with an additional letter from one of the 4 possible additional letters, which can be combined in one sentence, in one word, anaitu. Right? Alif, noon, ya, ta. Right? So either it starts, so yadribu, yadribani, yadribun, all start with ya. Tadribu, tadribani, yadribna, ta, then ya. Right? All the way to adribu, nadribu. So alif and noon. So those 4 possible letters, either you can say anaitu, easy way to memorize it, or na'aitu, or atena, or na'ti. All of those combine the 4 letters that are extra, which will be found on the beginning of a mudari'. فالهمزة للمتكلم مذكرا أو مؤنثا. So the hamza, which is an additional letter in the front of a fi'l mudari', like adribu, aktubu, asma'u, right? That hamza is for the speaker, meaning first person speaker, whether it be male or female. Right? So there's no separation if its speaker is a male or female. They both say afhamu, I understand. والنون, the noon, للمتكلم الذي يعظم نفسه, is either for the speaker, the first person speaker, a singular person who is honoring himself by speaking plural in a plural, right? And Allah does this a lot in the Quran, right? Inna anzalnahu fi laylatil qadr. Verily, we sent it down on the. Right? So that we is not for plurality, but it's for honor. Or it's for للمتكلم الذي يكون معه غيره. Or it's for the speaker who has other people with him. So he's including them in his speech. So it's not just I, it's us. It's we. نحو نفهم, we understand. And in Arab countries, many of the scholars, many of the ulama, especially people who memorize the Quran, they would say they might speak in plural. That we would like you to do this, right? And it's very common for the Arabs to do. وَالْيَاءُ لِلْغَائِبِ, and the ya is for a person who is absent, which is third person. وَنَحْوُ يَقُومُ, he is standing, he stands, or he will stand. وَالتَّاءُ لِلْمُخَاطَبِ أَوْ الْغَائِبَةِ, and the ta is for the one being addressed, the second person, or for a third person feminine, right? She, right? So you can have تَضْرِبُ have two different meanings at the same, be two possible meanings. So تَضْرِبُ can mean she is hitting, or تَضْرِبُ can mean one man are hitting, right? So whereas the تَضْرِبُ for the one man is the second person, whereas for her it's the third person, غائبة. So the ta can be for either second person or a third person feminine. نحو أنت تفهم يا محمد واجبك. You, O Muhammad, understand your duty. So this is second person, right? There's a ta there, and that means it's second person. وَنَحْوَ تَفْهَمُ زَيْنَبُ وَاجِبَهَا. Or you can say, Zainab understands her duty. Right, so the same ta is there, but one means second person masculine, the other one means third person feminine. فَإِن لَمْ تَكُنْ هَذِهِ الْحُرُوفُ زَائِدَةً, if these letters are not additional. So we mentioned that they have to be additional letters added to the beginning of the mudari'. If these letters are not additional, بَلْ كَانَتْ مِنْ أَصْلِ الْفِعْلِ, rather they are actually from the root letters of the verb. نحو أكد ونقل وتفل وينع. He gave examples. For the first one, there's a hamza in the beginning, but it's part of the root letters, not part of an extra letter. أكد, or a noon, نقل, or a ta, تفل, or a ya, ينع. أو كان الحرف زائدا, or the letter is additional, لكنه ليس للدلالة على المعنى الذي ذكرناه, but it does not indicate to the meanings that we're talking about. نحو أكرم, he honored, he ennobled someone. وتقدم, so form 4 would start with an hamza, right? Would start with the hamza, but that hamza is not a sign of mudari' because it is additional, yes, because the root letters are kaf, ra, mim. So it is an additional hamza, but it's not indicating to what we're talking about. It's not indicating to a mudari'. وتقدم, form 5, it has an extra ta, right? So you have form 5 has a ta, form 6 also has a ta, tafa'ala, right? And then other ones would have alifs as well. تقدم, that ta is extra. It's not part of the root letters, but it's not indicating to a mudari'. كان الفعل ماضيا لا مضارعا. If this is the situation, then it's a past tense verb, and it's not a mudari'. So that was it. Any question about that? يا حمزة ما في سؤال؟ تمام. So now he's going to go into the ruling of the mudari' and then give some examples from the Quran. So he says وَحُكْمُ الْفِعْلِ الْمُضَارِعِ, that the ruling of the fi'l mudari' is أنه مُعْرَبٌ, that it's not mabani like the past tense was. The past tense is mabani على الفتح. Either you can see the fatha visible or it's assumed. But the mudari' is mu'rab. And we mentioned before that it's marfu' unless there's reason to say that it's majzoom or mansub. So he says أنه مُعْرَبٌ ما لم تتصل به نون التوكيد ثقيلة كانت أو خفيفة أو نون النسوة. It is mu'rab, meaning it's not mabani, as long as it's not a noon of emphasis, which we mentioned. Either it's heavy and it has a tashdid, uktubanna or taktubanna, or it's light and has just the sukun, or the ending of the fi'l mudari has a noon of feminine, the third person feminine plural. If that ends on it, then it's not mu'rab anymore, because those things make it mabni. So if I say, for instance, yadribna, yadribna is mudari', but it's mabni because it ends in the noon of feminine. So that one would, so if I put a sign of that is if I put lam in front of it. If I say yadribu, I put lam yadrib. Right? It becomes majzoom. Yadriba, yadribani, lam yadriba. Yadribuna, lam yadribu. All the way down. Yadribna, lam yadribna. It's mabni. It will never fall off. That noon is permanent. So every mudari' that doesn't have a noon of emphasis on it, or a noon of feminine plural on it, then it's mu'rab. Otherwise, those two situations make it mabni. فإن اتصلت به نون التوكيد, if there is a noon of emphasis attached to it, بني معها على الفتح, then it becomes mabni with a fatha, just like Allah says in the Quran, نحو قوله تعالى لا يسجنن ولا يكونن من الصاغرين. Right? لا يسجنن. It was لا يسجن. And then he will be imprisoned. La yusjan with a sukun. But because the noon of emphasis was added on it, now it's mabni. وَإِنِ اتصلت به نون النسوة, if the noon of feminine plural attaches to it, بُنِيَ مَعَهَا على السكون, then it's mabni على السكون. نحو قوله تعالى والوالدات يرضعن أولادهن حولين كاملين. And the female women will breastfeed their children for 2 whole years. So يرضعن has the noon of niswa. Before it was mabni ala sukun, but now the noon, because of that noon, now it's it's mabni ala sukun. وإذا كان معربا, if it is معرب, فهو مرفوع, then it's مرفوع. ما لم يدخل عليه ناصب أو جازم, as long as nothing comes to make it mansub or to make it majzoom. نحو يفهم محمد, Muhammad understands. Right? يفهم is مضارع and it's مرفوع because there's nothing jazm and nothing nasib in front of it. فيفهم فعل مضارع مرفوع لتجرده من الناصب والجازم وعلامة رفعه الضمة والظاهرة. So it's فعل مضارع, it's مرفوع because it doesn't have a nasib or a jazm in front of it, and the sign of its being marfu' is that there's a dhamma that's visible on its end. ومحمد فاعل مرفوع بالضمة الظاهرة, and Muhammad is the fa'il, which is marfu' with a visible dhamma on the end. فإن دخل عليه ناصب نصبه. If a nasib, and we talk about which letters, which huruf, when you're added to the beginning of a mudari' verb, they make it mansub. So if one of those words enters upon it, nassabahu, it makes it mansub. Nahu lan yakhiba mujtahidun. The hard worker will never lose. So lan entered, before it was yakhibu, or la yakhibu, you can say, mujtahidun. But when lan came, it means lan yakhiba. It became mansub. He says, فَلَن حَرْفُ نَفْيٍ, sorry. That lan is a negative particle. حَرْفُ نَفْيٍ وَنَصْبٍ وَاسْتِقْبَالٍ. That is a harf that negates. It's a harf that also makes the verb after it mansub. And it's a harf that indicates that it's no longer possible that it's present or future. That's definitely future. Right? So when you use len, it limits the possibility of it being present tense. It's definitely future. because lan means never, will never, right? So if I said that he will never understand, is that present tense? It's automatically future tense. Right? So lan does that. It has three purposes or three effects. One is that it negates, so it's a negative sentence, not a positive sentence. It causes the word to be mansub, and it causes the meaning to now be limited just to future tense. ويخيب, the verb يخيب فعل مضارع منسوب بلن. It's fi'al, it's mudari', and it's in the state of nasab because of the lan. وعلامة نصبه الفتحة الظاهرة, and it's being mansub, or its mansubness, if you can say that, is shown by the clear fatha on the end, the visible fatha. ومجتهد فاعل مرفوع. The word mujtahid is the fa'il. All fa'il are marfu'. وعلامة رفعه الضمة الظاهرة. And the sign of it being marfu' is that the dhamma is visible. So that's all fi'l mudari' are marfu' unless one of the nasib or the jazm enters upon it. If the nasib enters upon it, then it'll make it mansub. He says, وَإِن دَخَلَ عَلَيْهِ جَازِمٌ, if a word that makes a harf that makes it majzum enters upon it, جَزَّمَهُ, it makes it majzum. نحو لم يجزع إبراهيم. Ibrahim never grieved, never became anxious. So فَلَم, this word lam is a harf nafyin. It's a negative verb. It's a negative harf. Sorry. وجزم, it causes the word after it to be مجزوم. وقلب, what is yours saying? And it makes it a past tense meaning, right? Because even though yajza is a mudari' type word, but because lam entered on it, it gives it a past tense meaning, right? So it switched it to past tense. So if I say yafhamu Muhammadun, Muhammad understands, right? If I put lam in front of it, then you would say Muhammad did not understand, past tense. So it switches, it has that extra effect on the verb. So lan, the effect of lan was that it's negative, it makes the word mansub, and it makes it only future tense meaning. Lam, with a lam mim, lam is negative, it makes the word majzum, and it makes it switch to a past tense meaning. So he says, وَيَجْزَعْ فِعْلٌ مُضَارِعٌ مَجْزُومٌ بِاللَّمْ. Yajza is fi'l mudari', it's majzum because of the lam, and the sign of it being majzum is the sukun on the end. And Ibrahim fa'ilun marfu'. Ibrahim is the doer, the fa'il, and all fa'il are marfu', and the sign of it being marfu' is the dhamma al-zahira on the end. Any questions? Okay. إلى متى هذا الدرس؟ So there's a chart for those who have the same. Does everybody have the same PDF? Okay, so there's a nice chart there. Maybe you can have it printed. We can print it for everybody as a handout. That would be good. Maybe one of the students can translate it and then print it out. So he mentioned in there that all fi'l mudari' are marfu' until proven otherwise. Right? Until there's a reason, something that happens to it or enters upon it that makes it either mansub or majzum. So now he's going to take that and talk about it in more detail. So what types of letters make it mansub? What types of letters make it majzum? So we talked about one type of harf that makes it mansub, which is lan, but that is one of 10. So he's going to go into it. He says, قال, and the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, فَالنَّوَاصِبُ عَشَرَةٌ. The letters that make the verb after it mansub are 10. وَهِيَ أَن, وَلَن, وَإِذَن, وَكَيْ, وَلَامُ كَيْ, وَلَامُ الْجُحُودِ, وَحَتَّى, وَالْجَوَابُ بِالْفَاءِ وَالْوَاوِ وَأَوْ. So that's a lot. He's going to go each one individually. وَأَقُولُ, now the commentator is saying, الأدوات التي ينصب بعدها الفعل المضارع 10 أحرف. Those huruf, those particles, by means of which the fi'l mudari after it becomes mansub, are 10 particles. وهي على ثلاثة أقسام, and those 10 break up into 3 parts, 3 types. قسم ينصب بنفسه, one type that it makes the word after it mansub just in and of itself. It inherently has the ability to make the mudari mansub. وقسم ينصب بأن مضمرة بعده جوازا, and one type which makes the verb mansub by adding the word an, okay, which is hidden inside of it jawazan, which is it's not necessary that it has to be there, but it's in certain situations it's there. Like for instance, hatta. If I said hatta yafhama Muhammadun, until Muhammad understands, but hatta in and of itself is not on this list. Right? It's not one of the 10. He didn't say one of the 10 is hatta, but hatta, inside of hatta there's an n. So it's actually hatta an yafhama Muhammadan. So this one, the second type, is those particles which make the fi'l mudari mansub because there's an n hidden inside of it. Right? Jawazan, it's possible, not necessary. It doesn't have to be there, because hatta can also be for other meanings. Hatta matla'il al-fajr, it's harf jar in other places. And then the third type is qismun yansabu bi an mudmaratan ba'dahu wujuban. And there's a type which makes the fi'l mudari mansub because of an n which is hidden, but this n is always there. It's there necessarily, not just possibly. Tamam. So the first one is that which makes the verb mansub in and of itself. It inherently has the ability to make the word mansub. So he says, أما القسم الأول, as for the first type, وهو الذي ينصب الفعل المضارع بنفسه, and it is that which makes the fi'l mudari mansub by itself, in and of itself. فأربعة أحرف. So it's 4 types, 4 words, 4 particles. وهي أن, lan, إذن, and K. N, lan, إذن, and K. So those, they don't make it mansub because of some other reason or because of something hidden. No, they in and of themselves make the verb after it mansub. So the first one, أما N, so the particle N, فحرف مصدر. It has many, he's going to talk about the many usages of N. So one of them is harf masdar, that using N, the translation of the verb after it will be translated as if it's an infinitive, if it's masdar, and the root word. For instance, An yafhama Muhammadan. Right? What's an example of that from the Quran? Here he goes. أخاف أن يأكله الذئب. Right? I fear that the wolf will eat him. So he has to translate as that. أطمع أن يغفر لي. I hope that he forgives me. Okay. وَنَصْبٍ, and makes the word after it mansub. وَاسْتِقْبَالٍ, and it makes it a future tense. وَمِثَالُهَا, or examples. أطمع أن يغفر لي ربي. I hope that my Lord forgives me. وقوله جل ذكره, and Allah's statement, وأخاف أن يأكله الذئب. And I fear that a lion, that a wolf will eat him. So يأكله, not يأكله, يأكله mansub. وقوله إني ليحزنني أن تذهبوا به. Verily that it grieves me that you go with him. Right? أن تذهبوا به. You can also translate it that you're going with him, which is the infinitive. It grieves me. So it has that. You can translate it as the masdar as well, which is one of the causes of N. So لَيَحْزُنُنِي أَن تَذْهَبُوا. It grieves me that you go with him, or you can say you're going with him, or you're taking him, grieves me. وقوله تعالى وَأَجْمَعُوا أَن يَجْعَلُوا. They agreed to put him in the well. Right? So to put, is that a verb in English? When you say to put? Right? Is it? I love to put tea in the cup. Is it used as a verb or is it used as an infinitive? As a root word. To sleep, to love, to drink, right? Or you can say sleeping, loving, drinking, putting, right? Infinitive. Right? So it can be translated as the masdar as well. So I fear that a wolf is going to eat him. That's future tense, right? You wouldn't say I fear that a wolf ate him. You wouldn't use an. أخاف أن الذئب قد أكله. And right, you would use something. You would use anna. You wouldn't use an. So all of these are present tense meanings. If you look closely, I fear that the wolf will eat him. I hope that my Lord will forgive me. I am grieved that you take him. Right? And they agreed to put him. Right? They agreed that they would put him in the well. وَأَمَّا لَن, so that's the first. And then, sure.
So I wanted to say, I think that a wolf ate him, or that it happened in the past. Then would it not be possible to use un? Would I have to use like the actual masdar or the conditional maf'ul or something?
Yeah, you would say it a different way. You wouldn't say it and yakulahu, right? Which is what they're talking about. You could say al-dhunnu. No, even that wouldn't work. And akadahu dhib. No, to put an in front of a maldi, it wouldn't sound right. You could say al-dhunnu anna dhib qad akadahu. I think that the wolf has eaten him. Right? Akadahu. So you would say anna dhib. So that n with the tashdid, it's a different harf. It's not this one. No. It wouldn't apply. This n wouldn't apply. You would have to say it a different way or switch the sentence around.
If I use a masdar without that, does that masdar have the meaning of it being in the future? So like like akul dhib.
Finish the sentence. أظن أن أكل الذئب قد حصل. Yeah, but then it would be أن. It wouldn't be أن still. So أن would only come. This type of أن would only come on a مضارع. هل عسيتم إن توليتم أن تفسدوا في الأرض. هل عسيتم past tense. إن توليتم again past tense. إن not أن. إن توليتم أن تفسدوا. تفسدون right? تفسدوا في الأرض وتقطعوا أرحامكم. So yeah. وأما لن, as for the word لن, we did just now. لن is that it's a negative, right? It's a negation. It's not affirming anything. It's a negative sentence. It causes a negative sentence. When nasbin, it causes the verb to become mansub. واستقبالا, and it causes the meaning of the mudari, which is normally present tense or future tense, to be only limited to future tense. Right? Will never. Right? لن نؤمن لك. We will never believe you. As Bani Israel said to Nabi Musa alayhi salam, لن نؤمن لك حتى نرى الله جهرة. That we will never believe you unless we see Allah. Prove it to us. Right? وقوله تعالى لن نبرح عليه عاكفين. And again, the Bani Israel said to Musa that we will never stop worshipping these idols until Musa, so they said to Harun, until Musa comes back from the mountain. We're going to continue. لن نبرح, we will never stop. So future tense. لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ, you will never obtain piety until you spend from that which you love. Okay, so all of them have a negative meaning. The verb after becomes mansub, and they all have a future tense meaning. Right? You will never. وأما إذن فحرف جواب وجزاء ونصب ويشترط لنصب المضارع بها ثلاثة شروط. إذن is a harf that for response, or a harf for the recompense or the fulfillment of the condition of a conditional sentence. Right? It causes the word to be mansub with three conditions. If three conditions are met, then it also causes the word after to be mansub. So what does it mean? A response, a letter of response. For instance, if I said راجعت للامتحان, I told Sidi Hamza that I revised for the test. And he responds to that by saying, إِذَن تُفْلِحَ. Right? Therefore, you will be successful. Right? So it is when it's used as a response to a sentence of somebody else, then it can be one of the words that makes the verb mansub. So إِذَن تُفْلِحَ, right? Instead of تُفْلِحُ. Right? إِذَن تُفْلِحُ, you will be successful. تُفْلِحَ is mansub. إِذَن تُفْلِحَ. ما راجعت للامتحان. I did not study for the test. إِذَن تَخْسَرَ. Therefore, you're going to fail. Or تَرْسَبَ. You will fail. وَجَزَاءٍ, right, is a harf that also is used to show the fulfillment of a conditional sentence. So a conditional sentence, if this, then this. If this, then this, right? So if I said, for instance, ذهب إن تجلس, how is that going to work? I think take an example. Can't think of an example. إذن والله تنجح. Let's see if I can think of an example as it comes, inshallah. So he says, and it also makes the verb after it mansub with three conditions. If these three conditions are met, then it is considered one of the letters that makes the verb after it mansub. So what are the three conditions? الأول أن تكون إذن في صدر جملة الجواب. That the harf إذن has to be in the beginning of the sentence that's responding to what was already said. So if I said, I studied for the test, right? The first word of the response has to be إذن. So, إذن تنجح, right? Therefore, you will be successful. So that's the first condition. That the first word of the response has to be إذن. الثاني أن يكون المضارع الواقع بعدها دالا على الاستقبال. The second is that the mudari', which comes after إذن. Now the إذن has to be the first word, right? So the mudari' that comes after it has to indicate to future tense. It can't be indicative of a present tense. إذن تنجح, then you will become successful. You will succeed in the test. Okay. الثالث, the third, ألا يفصل بينها وبين المضارع فاصل غير القسم أو النداء أو لا النافية. He says that the third condition is that between إذن, which has to be the first word, and the mudari' that comes after it, which indicates to a future tense, that between those two words, there can't be anything that separates it. With three exemptions. One is swearing. So if I said, إِذَن وَاللَّهِ تَنْجَحَ, then that's okay. Right? Then, by Allah, you will be successful. Or النداء, إِذَن يَا زَيْد تَنْجَحَ. Right? Therefore, O Zayd, or O my brother Zayd, you will be successful. Those are exceptions. Or لا النافية إذن لا تنجح. I did not study for my test. ما راجعت للامتحان. I did not revise for my test. إذن لا تنجح. So that لا comes in between إذن and the مضارع, but it's excused because it's a لا of نافية, a negative negation. So therefore you will not be successful because you did not revise for the test. So ومثال sure.
So in those, unless these three conditions are fulfilled, it doesn't act as a particle of nasab on the mudari. But does it still have the meaning of therefore?
Yeah, I think the translation stays the same. إن أكله الذئب ونحن عصبة إنا إذا لمن الخاسرين. Right, so it can be used in a sentence where there is no fi'l mudari. Right, if a wolf eats him while we are a large group of people, there's 10 of us. إنا إذا لمن الخاسرين. Then verily we, therefore, in that case, are losers. Right, so it can even be used outside of the fi'l mudari. But when it is used with the fi'l mudari, with these conditions, it makes it mansub. So he says, ومثال المستوفية للشروط أن يقول لك أحد إخوانك, and he's going to give examples of situations where all three shurut, all three conditions are met. Example is that one of your brothers says to you, سأجتهد في دروسي, that I'm going to work hard in my lessons. So you say to him, فَتَقُولُ لَهُ إِذَنْ تَنْجَحَ, therefore you will be successful. وَالْمِثَالُ الْمَفْصُولَ بِالْقَسَمِ, an example of it being the word إِذَنْ comes and the fi'l mudari, that there's separation there by means of an oath. An example is أن تقول إِذَنْ وَاللَّهِ تَنْجَحَ, therefore I swear by Allah you will be successful. Or therefore by Allah you will be successful. وَالْمِثَالُ الْمَفْصُولَةِ بِاللَّهِ النَّافِيَةِ, an example where those two are separated because of Allah, because of بالنداء, because of a call or an exclamation. And تقول إذن يا محمد تنجح, therefore O Muhammad you will be successful. ومثال المفصولة بالله النافية, an example of it being separated because of Allah النافية is that you say إذن لا يخيب سعيك, therefore your efforts will never go to waste. Therefore إذن لا, that la comes between يخيب. So إذن and يخيب, إذن is the harf, يخيب is the fi'l mudari, in between comes a la, but that's okay, that's allowed. أو تقول إذن والله لا يذهب عملك ضياعا, therefore I swear by Allah your efforts will never go neglected. Right, so he put both the oath and la together. Right, so that still is okay. So far we have en, len, and idhan. The last one is k. K can be translated as so that. Right, so that. As he mentions, here are some examples from the Quran. So he says, وَأَمَّا k, as for the harf k, فَحَرْفٌ مَصْدَرٍ, that it is a harf that gives the word after a meaning of its infinitive. وَنَصْبٍ, it makes the word after it mansub. وَيُشْتَرَطُ فِي النَّصْبِ بِهَا أَن تَتَقَدَّمَهَا لَامُ التَّعْلِيلِ لَفْظًا, but there is a condition in order for it to be able to cause the fi'l mudari after it to become mansub, and that condition is that prior to the k, there has to be a lam. وَلِلتَّعْلِيل, it's for the reason. Right? So it's li k. If it's going to come before a verb, it's going to be li k. Right? Li is harf jar. Right? And ta'lil means it's for that it shows the reason for something. Right? So and that has to be there in lafdhan. It has to be actually written there. Right? It has to be visible. نحو قوله تعالى, like Allah's statement subhanahu wa ta'ala, لكي لا تأسوا على ما فاتكم ولا تفرحوا بما أتاكم, so that you do not become grieved over that which you have lost, and that you do not become arrogant over that which has come to you. And that is the reason that Allah, He mentions for Him decreeing everything, right? That nothing happens in the land or in the earth except that it has been written in a book prior to us even creating it. And the reason for that, لِكَيْ لَا تَأْسَوْا عَلَى مَا فَاتَكُمْ, so that you do not grieve over that which has missed you, and you do not become arrogant over that which has come to you. So that you do not, right? So that you do not. لِكَيْ لَا تَأْسَوْا. Okay. أو تتقدمها هذه اللام تقديرا. So that in that sentence, you can see that the lam is there written. لِكَيْ لَا تَأْسَوْا. So the second possibility is that it's written, that it's not written, but it's assumed. Right? So these are the conditions for it to become nasib. So an example where it's not written, but it's assumed is كَيْ لَا يَكُونَ دُولَةً بَيْنَ الْأَغْنِيَاءِ مِنْكُمْ. Right? So that it doesn't become a play toy amongst the rich amongst you. Right? And this is talking about giving in charity and dividing the money in a proper way amongst the poor, the travelers, the orphans. Right? So that money does not become a plaything which just rotates around the rich people only. Right? The poor people never get any of it. Right? So كَيْ لَا يَكُونَ دُولَةً, there's no lam there, but it's assumed to be there. It's not written, but it's assumed. فإذا لم تتقدمها اللام لفظا ولا تقديرا كان النصب بأن مضمرة وكانت كي نفسها حرف تعليل. So if there is no lam prior to it, either written or assumed, then its mansubness, if its ability to make the word after it mansub, is because of a hidden n inside of it. And in that case, the K itself will be considered a harf of ta'leel. I mean, something that would show the reason for something. So K-N. So those four, and lan K idan, are huruf al-nasiba, words, harfs that make the mudari' mansub in and of themselves. Right? There's with no hidden n inside of it, or either necessarily or possibly they in and of themselves, with the conditions, make the word after mansub. So he talks about the second one. Any questions before we do that? If we start this, I don't think we'll be able to finish it. We don't have that much time. But if anybody has any questions, you can. Matthew? لا تستحيون أن تسألوا not أن تسألون. The noon drops, sorry. أن تسألوا. لا تستحيوا أن تسألوا. Do not be shy to ask. There we go.
The translation of gay, so that has like an implicit in it, right? So that.
Well, that would be more of the lam, the harf lam, li-kay.
I thought the li is like so, and the k.
Yeah, so the lam is for ta'leel, to show the reason. Right, so ذهبت إلى السوق, I went to the market, لأشتري ثيابا, to buy clothes. Right, so the lam shows the reason why I went. Right, it's the ta'leel. And that lam is also lam kay, right? Likay ashtariya. So that's gonna come because it's hidden, or li'an ashtariya, you can say. So the K itself is without the lam. You can't really translate any difference. There would be no difference in the translation. The lam is there, the lam's not there. It's still so that. Any other questions?
I have a question on one of the examples.
Sure.
Kind of unloaded.
But say it loud though, so they can hear.
There was an example here where it said, Anta tafhamu ya Muhammadu wajibaka. Why is it Muhammadu?
Ya Muhammadu. Why is it marfu' and why is it no tanween? Right. Maybe so. There's a whole chapter of ya and nida, which is the call, and it has a whole chart So if you're calling an individual noun, ism mufrad, then that noun, uh, which is ma'rifah, is a name, ya Zaid, ya Allah, ya Muhammad, right? Then it'll be mabni al dhamma. There'll be no tanween. Right? So ya Muhammadu, ya Zaidu. You not ya Muhammadun, right? But if there is an alif lam on the word that's being called, then you put ayyuha. You have to put ayyuha. So we have for instance, you want to call al-muzammil. Al-muzammil, you can't say ya al-muzammil. You have to say ya ayyuha al-muzammil. Or ya an-nabiyyu, ya ayyuha an-nabiyyu. You have to put ayyuha. You could say ya nabi with no alif lam. Right? Ya nabi. But not ya an-nabi. And then if it's an improper singular noun, ya rajulan, right? Oh, any man, anyone, save me. So there's a lot of rules. But ya has the meaning of ad'u. Ad'u. So anyway, that's it. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين. جزاكم الله خيرا.